Hello and welcome to this What's New session. My name is Rasmus Wolf Jensen and today's topic is B1 Usability Package 4.0, where we'll be looking into the new major release of the package. For that reason, we will not only be looking at the new features, but also the design goals behind 4.0, the new requirements, and the new release schedule. First, let's look at the overall history of B1 Usability Package. And with B1 Usability Package 4.0, we will now have our fourth major release. For each release, there was some design goals. For 1.0, it was the initialization and getting ready to release the first product, so it was all about functionality. 2.0 was the first global version, so the focus was on globalization and SAP certification. 3.0, released back in 2008, focus point was the usability package with easier configuration and licensing, which brings us to 4.0. For this release we have three main design goals, and these are out-of-the-box functionality, the way that you can just install and it just works. Performance, we have done a lot in making the product faster in every regards. And finally, discoverability, because we can see that B1 Usability Package do so much that most people don't know, and we need to make sure that it's easier to understand and easier to manage. Before we actually look at the new features, let's quickly have a look at the requirements, that is, in order to run 4.0. The requirements are documented in the install guide, but I will highlight three important requirements here compared to 3.0. The first one is that we require 8.8 or 8.81 in order to run B1UP 4.0. This means that 2007 installations will not be able to run 4.0, but we have chosen this in order to bring out new functionalities, and as we see the adoption rate of 8.8 has been so good, we are convinced that this is the right time to do this. We of course will have the old versions for 2007, but new functionality will not be added to them. Second new requirement is Microsoft.NET Framework 3.5. The old version only required 2.0, but our studies have shown that 92% of all installations have 3.5 already. So 3.5 will help us create better functionality and gain more performance. The last significant requirement we have is that you need to have paid the 2011 B1UP maintenance. So if you don't have this, you are not allowed to run 4.0. So please make sure that your accountants are checked that you have already paid this maintenance fee before you can run 4.0, else you are only allowed to run 3.x. So now talk about goals and requirements. Let's see what's new in 4.0. The first new thing you will notice is the new installer. It has a new design fitted for 8.8, and it's generally more secure during install and uninstall. Not that it was a big problem in the past, but it's more secure if needed. Optionally, we also offer a silent install mode. This means that the installer will automatically install instead of the cancel and install buttons. There will be a countdown, and once the countdown is over, it will just install. Next thing I will cover is a bit technical, but if you have dealt with the installation of usability package in very strict environments, you will know that B1 usability package in the past required special Windows permissions due to the writes we did in C code and program files. 4.0 removes that requirement, and instead it will write to the app data folder, which is a user-specific folder located here in Windows 7. In other systems, it will be other place under Documents and Settings. The point of this is not so much that you need to understand this, but just know that the data is now placed in another folder, and we will provide a special session on this if you require it later on. Once installed, we had in the past a problem of discoverability. You might notice being that once you install Usability Package, it actually doesn't do anything at all, because you need to decide what it actually needs to run. So there was no real indication on what to do next. For that reason, we will now in 4.0 introduce a new startup wizard. So the first time you start Usability Package, it will create some data, ask you to restart, and once that restart has been done, it will automatically show this configuration wizard to you. It's a series of 7 steps, as you can see here, that you can go through and get information about each functionality. There will be some text on what the functionality does, and links to e-learning videos as well. So it will essentially do everything you need to do in the main configuration window for you in a much more discoverability way. You can just ignore the wizard if you don't want to use it, but it's a nice addition to people not knowing what to do next the first time they run Usability Package. Next thing is performance. We have been doing a lot of tweaking and using a lot of new features in 8.8 and .NET 3.5 in order to increase performance. Performance have in general been done in every area of the product, but most importantly, we have decreased the startup time, and we have especially decreased the load time of windows that you modify using item placement tool and content creator. But I will show that a little later. Last thing before we look at more specific enhancements is that we have a better help system with more deeply integration into e-learning and YouTube content. So we have a new look and feel, we have the new updated screenshots, and for every section we also have a link to the e-learning as well that you might want to see rather than going through the manual. And also we have online resources down here, and in general a lot of links where appropriate. So let's move to the first specific new feature of 4.0, and that is the new user group system. The user group system works in the way that in the past we had the user fields on most configurations where you could set up that these users, this set of users, should be either included or excluded into the system. That system is still there, but in installations with a huge amount of users, this was quite administration work to do. So let's imagine that Doris, Fred and George was also in the sales department, and we had 10, 15, 100 different configurations that were all set up for the sales department. Then, if a new person joined the sales department, we needed to go through every single configuration that had Doris, Fred and George and add that new person. And that required a lot of maintenance. So the new system that is being introduced is that other than just users in the select users, you can also create user groups. So in this case, I created a user group called sales, which has Doris, Fred and George in it, and my configuration then just points at sales, which is the name of the user group. In that way, when a new person joins the sales department, all I need to do is go into the user group, add that user, and I'm done. So much easier to manage the different setups with different users. Next we have the mass import feature. This is probably the most asked for feature in the support email. So in the past, where we had the import and export buttons on almost any screen, but the major problem was that you could only import and export one at a time. So if I press the export, it just exported the one I was actually on. If I press import, it would ask for one file. From 4.0, you can now do a mass import. So instead of just asking for a file, it will ask you if you want to do one import or multiple imports. If you choose multiple, you will instead see a new import window where you can choose a folder that you want to import from. Once the folder is chosen, it will look to that folder, seeing what configuration you have here. So in this case, I'm on the universal function, and I have 189 selected configurations. There's some check of the data if, for example, in universal function, if the code already exists in function buttons, item placement tool, and so on. It will check if the universal function is actually there as well. But essentially, you can take an entire set from one database and send it over to another database. This is the first step. We'll be making it even more easy with one single window, but right now you just need to go, you can mass import of a different type, and it's possible for function buttons, item placement tool, mandatory fields, B1 validation system, and universal functions. Next enhancement is in the add and edit menus, and we have simply made it easier to work with. The first thing is you can, instead of going to administration, add-ons, and so on, you can simply right click and say add and edit menus, and to come directly to the configuration. And also, one of the annoying parts of using add and edit menus was to choosing the parent menu UID. So now you can simply double click it in order to get a list of the most common UIDs you choose for parent, and just choose it out in the session. Moving on, we come to B1 Search, which have got a lot of new functionality. First up is that SAP introduced the new cockpit, and that gave us some problems because our search toolbar was obstructed by the new menu. So now we support this SAP cockpit by saying that if the cockpit is running, the search toolbar will now be on top of the cockpit, while if you're running the old menu, you will just see the old mini toolbar. So it will never be obstructed by the SAP cockpit anymore. Also for B1 Search, we introduced something called single searches. It works the way that the search button on the toolbar is now a combo button, where you can either press the search in order to do a normal search as you would before, or you can press the little button next to it called single search. That will give you a drop down, and here you can tell what kind of thing you would like to search for. So if you know the search term is a business partner, you can simply search for business partners, and thereby giving you a faster search. The single search also introduced web searches, so you can simply choose one of these in order to search for Google, Bing, Wikipedia, or Twitter. Also, we have two new search terms. One is the service contracts and the customer equipment cards, so you can now search for those as well. And also, if you're doing a big search, but this was by mistake, you are actually able now to cancel your search. You simply press the cancel button will be enabled during the search, and you can simply press it in order to stop that current search. Next module we have got a lot of enhancements is the B1 validation system. It has always been the hardest module to work with, so we have invested a lot of time of making it more accessible to people. First of all, we will now in 4.0 introduce right-click functionality for the B1 validation system. So you can simply go to the window you want to create your validations for and choose Add B1 Validation Configuration. It will be context sensitive, so it knows that if you are in edit text, validate makes sense, while on the button, item press makes sense, and so on. Also, you have the option to go directly to existing B1 validations on a screen. If there's only one on the screen, it will automatically open that validation. But if you have multiple, it will show a list of all the different configurations you have. So a good way in order to get starting, when you just choose your new validation, it will create the trigger for you automatically. Then once you're on the window, there's also a lot of new help features in order to work with it. The first thing is common form types. So you will normally have the form type fields, but if you just want to choose one of the most common ones, there's a little button next to it now where you can choose the different form types. The same goes for menu UIDs and char press. Also, we have introduced that if you have a validation that should happen on multiple windows, or multiple items, or multiple columns, it is possible to separate them by a semicolon, and then it will work on both forms, both items, both columns, and so on. Also, in order to write some of the more advanced conditions, we have now introduced a common SQL structures, because most SQL conditions would be if-else sentences or case sentences, and we now have a little combo box next to it, so it writes all the groundwork for you, and you just need to put in your expression and your actions. The final new things for B1 validation is that you end up with a lot of configurations with a lot of UIDs in it. So you might not remember what is 133 actually. So we have made it that if you just click it, it will in the notification show you actually what it means. So in this case 133 is AR invoice. The same for menu UIDs as well. And we will be doing this a lot more in the future. Also, in terms of new features, we have a new event called when B1UP is finished loading. This makes sense for people wanting to run a usability package and in the end up with mostly a SQL report showing on a big screen, for example. So they just need to start up your B1UP, and it will take care of what you should see when usability package is finished loading. Moving away from B1 validation system and on to Master Data Manager. We have a few new features in here. The first one is that in Form Settings Manager, we now support the UDF sidebar. So if you have a UDF sidebar that you have set up different setups for different users in visibility and activity and categories, you simply just need to make this check as well, and you will get the configuration for those as well in the Form Settings Manager. Second for Master Data Manager is in BP Master Data Manager, where because 8.8 now allows us to change the different accounts on the BP Master Data, the control accounts, we now have all the different accounts that you can change to new values using Master Data Manager. Next module is Item Placement Tool. Item Placement Tool have two important features. The first one is that UDF items can now be shown as password fields, so you can either see the clear text or as the password stars. But the most important is the new performance in it. We now have a new render mode down here, XML will be the new default, and XML is between 2 and 20 times faster than the old system. So it all depends on the more you put on using UDFs, the faster it will be. So one example was that we had a customer and we were up in several hundred modifications to a single window, and that resulted in that the window took around 8.5 seconds to load. With the new render mode of XML, that 8.5 seconds have been reduced to 0.3 seconds. So there's a huge gain in the new XML mode. The reason we still have the old code mode is because during setup, XML will not give you that good debugging back. It will just say something is wrong, but it can't say what is actually wrong. So you might end up in implementation setting it to code mode, and once you're done, setting it back to XML mode, because then you get the speed. Next module is Toolbox. We have a small but nice new feature in the Toolbox under Usability Package. We have the Use Query Enhancer, and it simply just gives you in the query preview, if you use that, you have an edit text where you write your SQL, and that is often too small for complex SQL, so we just simply give you a plus and a minus button in order to make your edit area bigger or smaller as you want. Very simple, nice little feature. Moving on to universal functions, we will first show you a new universal function type, which we call dynamic code. This new function is aimed at developers, and in order to actually show it, you need to go to the main configuration and enable advanced development options. You need to confirm that the warnings about this being potentially unsafe to do, but if you turn it on, you will be able to see the new dynamic code system. So basically what it does is it gives you a field here where you can write C# or VB.NET code, and in essence it makes that universal functions will be able to do practically anything. It could be everything from creating activities, business partners, opening windows in an advanced way, to exporting data into files. You have the full potential of the SDK, you have the full potential of C# in here. This is not for everyone. It is only for people who actually have developer skills. And for that reason, we will consider all support without any exception as premium support in this, because you can pretty much do anything here, and if you don't know what you're doing, you could potentially end up with a lot of different things. You could essentially delete the database from here if you wanted. So we give you the option, but it's certainly not for everyone. Moving on, we have the content creator. Just like item placement tool, it has now also the new render mode, which makes it faster, and it also have the new password field. So just exactly the same as item placement tool. Next is macro. We as such don't have any new macro commands, but we have discovered that many people don't know the existing macro commands, so we have used a lot of time making it possible for you to use them and a greater discoverability of them. First, directly on the macro window, we have a list of all the commands now that you can quickly insert into the field, but you can also take the wizard and get more information with a description, and help for each argument with a lot of common features. So here are all the commands, and it's simply just making it easier for people who don't know the command that good to be able to write them as well. Moving on to probably the most used universal function, which is SQL report for custom reporting. It has a lot of new features. The first one is that in the past we just showed the report, but we didn't give you the option to sort the data in the report. Automatic sorting with 8.8 is now possible, so we have introduced it. You don't actually need to change anything in your existing configuration, it will just be there. Second is that when we use the choose from lists syntax here, the %0 syntax, where you get defined survey values, we only supported in the past a string value, an integer value, and a datetime value, so a date. So you wrote string, date, and so on for the type. We now have the option to use different types as well by giving the table name. So if you put in OCID, it will actually know that OCID means business partners, and you can now press tab and get a list of business partners, OITM for items, and so on. Final new thing in it is we now have our auto refresh system. This is good for people using these SQL reports on a big screen hanging in the office, showing the current state of the business. So the auto refresh is simply just refreshing the content on an automated interval. You can see the default is not auto refresh, but you can say every 30 seconds or every 10 minutes refresh the data in my report. And you just put it in the combo box and it will happen automatically once the report is running. Final new feature I will show is in line loop for universal functions. The new feature is the direction system. The normal way a line loop works is it just loops to every single line, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. But the new direction system will say last to first, so it can run from 4, 3, 2, 1. And it might not seem that useful, but it's actually, if you want on the fly to remove a line, you need to run them backwards. So if I wanted to run remove item line 2 here, if I remove that here, it would automatically skip line 3 in a first to last experience. This is a common programming scenario where you then run it from last to first in order to get rid of that annoyance. And we now simply give you the option to do that. And we will of course provide samples on how to actually do it. So that was the new features. And Usability Package, being a new major version, is mostly about new features, but there's a few important bug fixes as well. The most important is that there has been in the past a huge annoyance in that sometimes you needed to press golden arrows 2 times from B1 search, SQL report, and so on, and we have finally nailed the problem. Because we're now going to 8.8, there's a workaround that we can finally use. So that is very good. Also, in 3.9.3, which was the latest version, we introduced a general problem with the tab control. Some people have hit it, some people haven't, but it was all about some internal flowing of the system. That is fixed now in 4.0. And these fixes will also be ported back to 3.9. So at 3.9.3.1 will be introduced in a few weeks. So moving on to the release schedule. 4.0 is released today. being the 14th of January, where this is recorded. And you're able to download it from boyum-it.com/SPO. Also, with the release of this, we are now introducing a new release schedule for 4.0. Before, in 3.x, we had a monthly release, and that monthly release was on the last work day of the month. We saw that was a problem because many installations went live the first of the month, and it simply made it too late to incorporate the new version into that release schedule. So we are still doing monthly releases, but instead we are running it on the mid-month, the 15th of the month, or the day before if it's a weekend. This concludes this session. For training material, please go to service.boyum-it.com/education, or if you want a free demo of the product, go to license.boyum-it.com/B1UP. If you want to contact us, you can do it either by our sales email or our support email. Thank you for attending.